Before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story. It happened a few years ago. I own a small phone repair shop in a quiet district of a small province. The shop isn't anything fancy, just a modest row house-style building with a sliding glass door at the front, reinforced by a rolling metal grill gate outside. It's the kind of place where I handle everything related to phones, from trade-ins and sales to repairs. Life in this area is slow and uneventful, but on one particular evening, something truly unsettling happened. That evening, I stayed late at the shop as usual. A customer had dropped off his phone earlier, and I wanted to finish the repair before calling it a day. By the time I closed the shop for business, I locked the glass door, but left the metal grill gate open, figuring it didn't seem necessary to lock it since I was still inside. I turned on some music to keep myself company and got to work at my desk in the corner. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was around 9 p.m. I was engrossed in the repair when I suddenly heard it, a sharp knocking sound at the glass door. At first, I thought it was probably my girlfriend. She worked in the shop next door. Sometimes she forgot her keys or needed help getting into her shop. We lived and worked in the same building, so it wasn't unusual for her to drop by late at night. I set down the tools and made my way to the front door, expecting to see her. But when I reached the door, I froze. Standing on the other side of the glass was a young man. His face was pressed against the glass door. He was staring straight at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. But what shocked me most was his appearance. His face was covered in cuts and bruises, and blood was dripping from his forehead. His clothes were dirty and torn. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at him as my mind raced. Why was he here, and what did he want from me? He then spoke, held up his damaged phone to show it.
"Excuse me, could you fix my phone?"
I unlocked the door and let him inside. He slowly limped into the shop, and I noticed the scrapes and bruises covering his body. It was clear he had probably just been in an accident, and from the way he walked, it seemed like he had fallen off a motorcycle. I quickly grabbed a chair for him and gestured for him to sit down. "Shouldn't you go to the hospital? I can ask someone to take you, or I can call an ambulance for you." He shook his head, trying to brush off the pain.
"It's fine, I'm with my friend,"
he said, pointing toward a dark corner across the street. I squinted, trying to see where he was pointing, but couldn't make out anyone standing there. "I don't see anyone," I said, my voice filled with confusion. He insisted his friend was there. Seeing no reason to doubt him, I gave up looking and turned my attention back to the young man. From his demeanor, it was clear he had no intention of going to the hospital. Realizing he wasn't going to change his mind, I tried a different approach. "What about your injuries? I could clean your wounds for you." But he declined again. Instead, he explained that his phone screen had cracked during the accident and asked me to fix it.
"Could you fix it for me?"
He said he would leave the phone with me and asked me to call his mother once the repair was done. As he handed me his phone, he also gave me his mother's number and the password. After a brief conversation, I explained the repair costs and how long it would take. We finalized the details and he left the shop, walking across the street toward where he said his friend was waiting. Still, I didn't see anyone there, or any sign that his friend was actually there. Once he left, I locked up the shop, not giving it much more thought. I returned to my work desk, shifting my attention to the other phones waiting for repairs. I continued working on the phones until it was almost 11 p.m., finishing the repairs, including the one brought in by the young man earlier. Once I had tidied up the work area and taken care of a few personal tasks, I finally called it a night and went to bed. While lying in bed and browsing on my phone, I came across a post on Facebook from the local rescue team in my district. The post, made about 2 hours earlier, caught my attention. It mentioned a tragic motorcycle crash involving a pickup truck that had resulted in 2 fatalities, the motorcyclist and his passenger. It was a typical post for the rescue team. No gruesome photos, just a brief report. The post didn't include any pictures of the deceased, which was their usual protocol. I thought little of it at first and kept scrolling, but then I saw something that made me pause. A new post read, "Rest in peace. We'll miss you." It was a final goodbye to the two victims of the accident mentioned earlier, accompanied by a photo and tags of the deceased victims' Facebook profiles. The photo was a bit dark, so I squinted and looked more closely. One of the faces looked oddly familiar. It was as if I had seen it before, but I couldn't immediately place it. Curious, I clicked on the post to see who had commented. Most of the comments were centered around the accident itself. People were sharing their thoughts on the crash, describing how the motorcycle had collided with the pickup truck. Many mentioned superficial injuries, like abrasions and a head injury, but the actual cause of death was much more severe, a broken neck, which had killed the riders instantly. I still couldn't place where I had seen the young man before. His face lingered in my mind, but the memory wouldn't come. I decided to check the Facebook profiles of the tagged individuals to see if anything would jog my memory. As I browsed through the profiles and saw more pictures of him, I was shocked and frozen with fear. The person in the photo was the same young man who had come into my shop earlier to ask for repairs. Shocked, I jumped out of bed and rushed to the workshop, a cold wave of fear washing over me. I had to check the phone the young man had brought in for repair. It didn't make sense. How could he be dead? I had just seen him, but I needed to be sure. It could be someone else who just looked similar. I grabbed the young man's phone from the counter and entered his password. Sure enough, the Facebook account I had just seen was the same one linked to that young man's phone. I froze for a moment, my mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. The young man I saw, the post, it all felt real, and his phone was now in my shaking hands. As I placed the phone down on the workbench, I remembered that a friend of mine worked with the local rescue team. Maybe he could have some answers. Grabbing my own phone, I quickly called his number. When he answered, I asked if he knew anything about the accident or what had happened. He confirmed the crash had occurred around 8 p.m. A knot tightened in my stomach. The timing matched. I then asked if the young man's phone had been recovered at the scene. My friend said only the phone belonging to the other victim had been found. Of course, no phone was found at the scene. It was right in my hand. But how is this possible? That young man had died at the scene. After a short conversation, my friend asked if I knew the young man. I began recounting everything that had happened. Both of us were puzzled, unsure whether the young man was alive or a ghost. My friend suggested contacting the young man's mother to ask about it the next day. At that moment, my girlfriend returned home, and I couldn't wait to tell her everything. I explained the strange events that had unfolded, hoping she could make sense of it all. We decided to check the CCTV footage to see if it would provide any answers. As the footage played, we were both horrified. The video showed only me in the shop, walking around and behaving strangely as if I were talking to someone. But there was no sign of the young man in the video at all. I had been by myself all along. We both felt a chill run down our spines and immediately realized that something eerie was going on. The next morning, I took a deep breath and called the young man's mother using the number he had left. I explained that her son had brought his phone in for repair and that it was now ready for pickup. Her response, however, left me stunned. She tearfully told me that her son had passed away the night before. A wave of disbelief washed over me. I shared the story of the young man's visit and the strange events that had occurred the previous evening. When I finished, she broke down in tears. Between sobs, she explained how much her son had always been attached to his phone, even in his final moments. Her words hit me harder than I could have imagined. That afternoon, the mother came to pick up her son's phone. I handed it to her with a heavy heart and offered her a special discount as a gesture of condolence. It felt inadequate, but I didn't know what else to do. Later that night, around 9 p.m., I was still working alone in the shop, trying to push the unsettling events from my mind. Then, I heard a knock at the door. An inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. My instincts told me that something terrifying was about to happen. Not daring to look up, I kept my head down, pretending to focus on my work, hoping whatever it was would just go away. Then, I heard a voice thanking me in a strange, unnatural tone.
Thank you.
The words hung in the air for a moment before the sound of a motorcycle engine revved up and sped away into the distance. I was frozen, unable to move or respond. I wondered if it was the same ghost of that young man, perhaps thanking me for fixing his phone. The encounter left me shaken, and from that night on, I never worked alone in the shop after dark again.